Welcome back to the Week in Review. We got a special one today. Mickle Markets is in the house. Somebody roll that beautiful intro.
Digital Perspectives with Brad Kimes. Come on in.
Welcome back to the show. As promised, the one and only Mickle's in the house. Mickle, how you doing this morning, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. Always excited to be here and talk about everything going on in the XRP world.
Absolutely, man. And we're glad you're here with us. And look, and there's a lot to talk about. So, let's start here because we could go a bunch of places, and we probably will before this is over. But Stuart Alderati just did an interview and was asked about what if the SEC appeals, and essentially went on a long thing that says if the SEC is a rational actor, they will not appeal, but the SEC is not a rational actor, so we should expect an appeal, and this may go to the highest court in the land. Now, I've always been in this place, but this is the one thing that I am absolutely happy to be wrong about. I'd love to see this case over sooner rather than later, and I will be happy to. I was so wrong on that. I would love that, but I do think it does go to Supreme Court ultimately. Mickle, what are your thoughts and what are you seeing here?
Yeah, so ultimately, I think I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I think if we do go to the Second Circuit, then that kind of confirms we will go to the Supreme Court. I think we're not going to stop halfway. Right. Both parties at that point would take it there. But I think the most important thing we need to take away from it is, and this was confirmed by Stuart Alderati in that interview, is one, the fact of whether or not XRP is or isn't a security, that can't be appealed. XRP going forward is not a security. So that's one of the things he specifically stated. And the reason for that, just so people know, is because the SEC kind of quasi said XRP was a security, wasn't a security in the case, but they never actually formally made it their argument. And because it was never their argument from the start, there's really nothing to appeal. Judge Torres went out of her way, regardless of what the SEC's claims were, to say, as a matter of fact, because there's so many retail holders here, I want to make it clear XRP is not a security. So Stuart Alderati confirmed that in the interview, which I think is great. So it really just has to do going forward with how Ripple uses XRP and the ways in which they sell it. I don't know if there's really that much meat on the bone left for the SEC in terms of what they can get out of this. They kind of already got a win in terms of those institutional sales. Going forward, Ripple likely will register some sales with the SEC, especially a less hostile SEC. So I think it was some level of a win. And then if we take a look at where it goes for the SEC from here, at the Second Circuit, Stuart Alderati confirmed in that interview, there's a less than 10% chance that an appeal is successful, typically at the Second Circuit. And as we know, that factors in a lot of the good cases as well. I wouldn't anticipate, or I wouldn't think this is one of the good cases, so I would think we're probably significantly under the 10% likelihood that anything would change on appeal. And then, as we know, if we went to the Supreme Court, that's even less likely for an SEC win because of how conservative that court is and how anti-government regulator they have been. So it's a long-winded way of saying, obviously, it would be annoying to go all the way there, but I don't think there's any increased chance that things would get worse for us. In fact, I think things would actually get better. And it goes back to what Stuart Alderati said. Is the SEC a rational actor here? Are they just going to take the win they got, or are they actually going to make things worse for themselves? What they're going to do there, I have no idea. But ultimately, I like being in the position that no matter what happens, I believe we're going to end up on the winning side of it.
I agree with you. And I say that, if we do see this go to Second Circuit appeal, right, and then ultimately, I think you're right. If that goes there, we're going the distance, right? There's no need to stop at the appellate court level. Go to the Supreme Court and finish this thing. And I agree that, I see adoption continuing to grow, even with the case potentially going on to appellate court and Supreme Court. I see adoption for the technology continue to be unleashed a little, like letting the brake off, right, of this as it's happening, but still keeping this legal dog leash on top of the case, because what we are talking about is literally introducing a new digital asset that serves as money inside of the financial system. They can't afford to get this wrong. So there needs to be some legal connection there, I think, to make sure and to ensure that this is happening at the rate of adoption and as they wish to see it happen.
Yeah, I also think it's important to take into account as well. Like right now, we're going off a lot of assumptions that like the SEC's posture wouldn't change, and I think it's very possible that we get a new administration in the coming year, and we get. I mean, imagine how things would look if we got a pro crypto SEC chair. I know that's a dream scenario right now, but if we did get someone like Brian Brooks in that position, it's possible they just might walk in and just settle the case there and then really focus on having Congress usher in regulation, so we might not need to go the distance. And that's why I say it's kind of really nice where we sit. It's like I know people don't want to hear that we could go to the Supreme Court, but I really do think that's the worst case scenario in terms of time. And when you think about it, when the worst case scenario is that we're likely going to still win at the Supreme Court level if we go there, it's so much better than what we were looking at 3 years ago, where we were wondering what the outcome of the current case would even be, what XRP's designation is. It's really turned out extremely well, better than I think most people would have anticipated. And just to have clarity going forward that XRP is not a security, to see the CME starting to release futures on these things, I think it's already baked into the cake that going forward in the United States, XRP is going to be seen as a commodity. And I think the SEC is going to be a little petty about it for a bit, but I think ultimately it's kind of already written in the sand.
And isn't it interesting that if the SEC, should they decide to appeal, it will be extremely telling the angle in which they're going to attempt to appeal, right? Because the interlocutory attempt that they made for an appeal in the middle of the case after the summary judgment ruling, they tried to push back on programmatic sales not being securities, right? So it'll be very telling if they, because that meant a lot to them. That's why they pushed for that interlocutory appeal, right? But they were denied. That argument didn't rise to the occasion. So I don't think it does here. I don't think they can introduce any new facts. But again, this is not a rational actor, so I wouldn't see them letting that stop them from doing such a thing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this conversation would be really easy if we were dealing with a rational actor, but it's so funny because we come in with all this logic and then we have to preface it afterwards and saying the SEC might just do this just to spite Ripple. Exactly. So I completely agree with you. I will say, I think we did see some capitulation on the SEC side that not a lot of people have really taken into account. So after we kind of found out that the SEC couldn't really appeal the fact of XRP not being a security, the SEC actually removed the claim that the 13 tokens in the Binance case were securities. That's right. So I think they're really actually walking back a lot of those claims. I think they're really starting to watch what's happening in Congress and saying, okay, even if we win on some of these things, Congress is just going to reverse these wins anyway because they're already going down the path that these things are not securities. The SEC, in my eyes, is really has their best cases with the exchanges, with things like on-exchange staking, with things like ICOs, with things like lockup period sales, discounted sales, and stuff like that. And that's kind of the win they got in the Ripple case. When you look at it, it was like when really Ripple was selling to institutions for like a discount and a lockup. So it just seems to me like the SEC could really spin this kind of as a win for them to go after these other things and actually start litigating cases they could actually win. It doesn't seem like there's much left on the table for the SEC. It kind of seems like they're acknowledging some of that in other cases as they're pulling back some of these claims. So it's all to say that if the SEC does have any semblance of rationality, really we should be looking at this case being a massive win in the near term. But the only thing I see extending it is pettiness and ultimately trying to hold Ripple back. How much of that is there at the SEC? I really don't know. I think we're just going to have to wait and find out.
No, I think it's a great point. And you know, now let's shift and talk about, because look, we're waiting for what's going to happen in that regard to get more direction there. And we should have that soon enough. And now we turn our attention to the real USD. We've heard from Monica Long and Brad Garlinghouse, likely this year. Brad's going as far as say around the end of the third quarter, give or take. I'm surmising what he was saying or paraphrasing. But, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Are we getting it? What do you think?
Yeah, so It was interesting to me that we got the kind of news that it went into testing the day after the case was over. So I don't know if they're going to push it out and wait and see if there is an appeal. I don't know the legal arguments behind that and if there's really any reason to do that. So far as I understand it, it really doesn't matter because it wasn't in the initial complaint anyway. The SEC might just try to throw it in, but I don't know the significance of it. It seems to me like we'll definitely get it before the end of this year, which I think would be very promising.
Yep.
We want more high quality assets on the XRP ledger and more assets that can be used for different things like DeFi. And obviously, a dollar denominated unit is something that humans in general and every one of us in our daily lives like really peg to the current monetary system. It's something that we need to transact. So I think having that same representation on a blockchain is going to be very important. I think Ripple being a high quality issuer with a massive balance sheet is going to be the best person in the ecosystem in the short term to be able to provide this. So I think it's going to foster a lot of new innovation. I think it's going to foster a lot of new utility with using this thing as collateral in different DeFi applications. And as we kind of move into a world where institutions start rolling out institutional DeFi within Ripple's custody solutions, I just think having a dollar stablecoin is something that they're going to obviously need and want. So I think it's just an important step in fostering in a lot of new institutional adoption as well as innovation.
And I think it's worth mentioning to people too that, you know, this stable coin is going to be launched on the Ethereum network and the XRP ledger, just around about $400 billion worth of market cap exposure. That's pretty exciting, right?
Oh, for sure. And there's two things about it that I know a lot of people ask questions on. One is how does it affect the relationship with XRP? It's important to understand that RLUSD is going to be a trusted stablecoin. It's not going to be decentralized. And the reason for this is because in the real world, when you make a payment to someone you're not supposed to be making a payment to, say someone on a sanctions list, you can't just tell a government official, oh, sorry, like there's nothing we can do about it. In the real world, you have to be able to pull those payments back. And that's one of the big reasons why, obviously, Ripple is introducing this in a new kind of way. There's really not a stablecoin right now on the market that has these kinds of permissions around it. And while to the OG kind of anti-government crypto crowd, that's something that's unappetizing, I think to large institutions and people building businesses in regulated environments, this is going to be extremely appetizing to know that they can meet the regulators' needs. So that's a massive difference between that stablecoin and XRP. XRP is always going to be this neutral, decentralized, no one can actually claw it back. No one has full control over it. But this stable coin is very different in that sense. So they complement each other really well. XRP is always going to act as a critical piece of the XRP ledger, critical liquidity. It's burned in every single transaction. You can't have the XRP ledger without XRP. The stablecoin is very different, right? The stablecoin has never existed before. The XRP ledger is fine without it. It's just an extra tool on the XRP ledger that helps XRP and the XRPL. So I think those are some really important things to understand here. I think it's going to make more institutions interested in holding XRP and using XRP as liquidity over the long run. I think it brings them into the ecosystem. And one of the things I always love to hear, or one of my favorite quotes I heard is you have to sell people on what they think they want rather than what you know they need. So a lot of these institutions think they want a non-volatile cryptocurrency. They just want a stable coin. They want something just to get their feet wet. But ultimately, over the long run, Ripple is obviously gearing their products towards using XRP as that liquidity, as a bridge currency. And I think this is the first step to really bringing them in.
I do too, because you're talking about that on and off ramp, right? It's like everybody's going to want to convert to dollars. You're making that happen. You're making it super easy and seamless to do so. I love that they start off, they're going to integrate both of these networks together. I think there's going to be a lot of, realization that comes to a lot of developers on projects on Ethereum that in their interaction going between the bridge of the two are going to learn a lot. Like, wait a minute, and I think you're going to see a mass exodus there because of that in part. And I'm not suggesting Ethereum doesn't have use case. It has smart contracts. It does that well. But I'm just saying beyond that, I think a lot of people are going to discover there's a better opportunity to build what their ideas are there. And that's going to be good for us. Now to the stablecoin idea, it's interesting to me because I remember when Brad Garlinghouse had mentioned Circle as an example had lost their peg temporarily at one point. and Circle, the company, came out and says, we guarantee the dip in the peg. We got it, right? They used their own cash reserves to actually cover that break in the peg. And he said, we could actually do that even better than like Circle could do it. And in that remark, I thought to myself, this is the first time that it has ever been uttered as a notion that XRP could backstop $1. Because that's exactly what he said in that moment, is that we have basically a lot of money in XRP, and if the peg were ever to be broken, we could guarantee that peg with the escrow we hold. And I thought to myself, because to me, ultimately, that is where this is going. That is the first step of moving to a place where you use something like this bridge asset to reinsure and start to underpin and build underneath of this paper money system assets underneath of it, asset-backed system, moving from a debt-based system to a multipolar asset-backed system, Mikkel. It sounds like where we're going.
Yeah, and I think this stablecoin is going to get a lot more exciting with time as well. I think it's going to be changed a lot and innovated on. About 3 years ago now, maybe even 4, when I was first really starting learning about this ecosystem, David Schwartz actually put out a video, and it was kind of just not really meant for people to see. I think it was more of like an internal thing that came out, and it was him talking about a decentralized stablecoin trading on the XRP ledger. And ultimately, that's not the path they went down, because I think with the Terra Luna blow up and a lot of other things going on, and with the stablecoin regulations around the corner, they just wanted to get a product out there that would comply with regulations so that institutional partners could start using it. But ultimately, that's to say that I think Ripple has some very, very advanced and intricate plans for how they could build out this stablecoin going forward when those regulations are there. And I think we're going to see some really exciting things, like possibly in the future, XRP directly being one of the assets that backs the stablecoin and almost being used as a reserve behind that. I think that would be aggressive to come out the gate with stablecoin regulations around the corner. The last thing you want to do is come out with a stablecoin designed with XRP as backing it and then find out that, oh, it's in the stablecoin regulations. You can't do that. That wouldn't make any sense. Exactly. But down the road, I think Ripple is already planning on doing a lot of stuff like this. And to your Ethereum point, I think that's interesting as well. If you could spin up a lot of these same applications in XRP Ledger sidechain, and you can run all these same things cheaper and faster and more efficiently, in some kind of ways, it could almost act as a siphon, pulling value away from the Ethereum network into the XRP Ledger ecosystem. And then as people, like you said, and I completely agree with, start to realize the benefits of using the XRP Ledger in the fast, efficient payments, I think it's going to make a lot of sense for people to ultimately keep that value there permanently.
Well, and to wrap this conversation on stable coins, and then I want to go to ETF conversation with you real quick. But when I think about stable coins, I come back to stablecoin legislation, and now the left is posturing, and Senator Chuck Schumer, I think we can get it done by the end of the year. It's amazing what they think they could get done when their own political career is on the line, right?
Especially when it's so close to election, huh?
Yeah,
Everything speeds
so
up.
close to election. I actually think we can get this done, fellas. It's unbelievable. But for 4 years they've been squashing it and trying to kill it and doing the bidding for the big banks, right? So I'm not going to forget that when I go to the voting box. But my point is that should we get legislation, however it goes, whether it's this administration, the next one, whatever, I do think it's imminent and it's coming. When we get it, in regards to stable coins, there are currently more than 20,000+ tokens on the market. And I'm pretty sure we don't need 20,000 coins on the market because there isn't 20,000 use cases, right? Yeah. However, with that being said, if we get stablecoin legislation, do you think it mirrors MiCA in that USD Tether won't qualify as a stablecoin here in the US? Because if that happens, I'm just coming at this, Mikkel, from if I'm the government. What's the most diabolical thing that I could do as the government and get control of this market? I would outlaw USD Tether as a stablecoin or make it non-compliant, whatever the term is, and have it sit outside of regulation and cut it out. And then that would start to suffocate that. And along with it, the tens of thousands of other coins that there's only one way to buy that little crap coin that doesn't do anything. It's through USD Tether. And if I make it so you can't use USD Tether, I just got rid of 90+% of the market. Just like that. Now,
Yeah.
think of that for a moment, and all the money, they're talking about $2.8 trillion market in the next few years in just stable coins alone, which is our market cap now almost. Think about that, and now instead of 20,000+ coins and all those trillions of dollars flowing into, but maybe 1,000 or less coins. Talk to me about that.
No, actually, that's great. And I hadn't really thought that much about moving some of those coins out of the investable market and how that creates concentration in kind of the blue chips. But on the Tether front, I think this is such a funny conversation because we've actually seen this countless times with almost every single technology. You see the Napsters come around, you see the LimeWires, you see kind of the Silk Roads and all these different kind of original products that want to keep their ethos. And it doesn't mean those aren't valuable in some sense to the world. Like a lot of people got tremendous value from all those different applications. And while there were nefarious things done with those, like people were using the Silk Road for legitimate use cases, especially people in countries where they didn't have access to other forms of e-commerce. So in that same exact way, I think that's how Tether's going to live out the rest of its life. I think for the most part in the large financial jurisdictions, Tether's essentially just going to be outlawed.
Yep.
Or not necessarily outlawed, but given a qualification that makes it less investable or less holdable by large institutions. So it could be something as simple as FDIC insurance applying to things like USDC and RLUSD because they comply with ongoing regulations and not something like Tether. Instantaneously with something like that, no large financial institution in any jurisdiction is going to touch Tether if it doesn't have that quasi-government backing or guarantee behind it. Now, will Tether still be used all over the world for people in different jurisdictions who want to use that specific asset because they don't want the risk of it being clawed back or don't want to interact with the US government? Absolutely. Like, it's still going to be all over the world. But when you're talking about the use case behind retail using this thing for kind of dark web payments or just using it to get access to dollars in jurisdictions where there's no banking, I think that's a lot smaller than large financial institutions putting dollar-denominated units like USDC and RLUSD on their balance sheet and using it for institutional DeFi. So I think when ultimately we do see these regulations come in place, they are going to push Tether out or at least give it a less desirable designation. And companies like Ripple and Circle, who have obviously been doing everything they can to work within these different guidelines put out by the government, I think those products are going to be poised to benefit most. And I think there's hundreds of historical examples of this happening across different industries. The early players who don't adapt to the regulations, they kind of get pushed to the wayside. It's not to say they implode and disappear and there's some death spiral. No, typically like things like the dark web are still up and running. It's just that in terms of large regulated money, it just can't touch some of this stuff if it's not willing to comply.
No doubt about it. And, you know, to your point here, I really do believe this. Circle, Stellar, Ripple, Paxos even, they're always at every treasury government meeting, right? They're all to me, those are your foundational pillars to the U.S. market infrastructure, to the digital economy. And we haven't seen all of them really do their thing yet. Obviously, Circle's taken off because it's a stable coin, right? Obviously, very solid use case, right? But looking at all the rest of those, I think it all takes off when we get legislation, because you're going to see those things introduced into the world of the digital economy, the way it's working. And that will be the foundational pillar and presence of the U.S. market infrastructure being revealed to tie into this digital realm. That's how I see what's coming. Your thoughts on that real quick?
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. And I think it kind of only takes one jumping in because everyone's kind of using regulations right now as a reason for why, oh, we can't step in, because it's easy. It's easy to say, oh, the regulators are preventing us from doing this. And it makes sense. Like if I worked for a large corporation before I started doing crypto full time, and like the conversation of using any of this stuff without regulations, it's just impossible to do. There's too many checks and balances. But the second that switch is turned on and some of your competitors start taking advantage of it, and suddenly they're moving money all around the world within seconds rather than 3-day transfers, I mean, then you're at a competitive disadvantage, and the entire conversation around all of this is flipped upside down. And now, hey, what do we need to do to fix our back end processes to compete with this person who is proactive in adopting this technology? So I think it's going to be a massive snowball effect. No one can touch it before there's regulations because no one wants to end up in the position, quite frankly, Ripple has been in. But as soon as that changes, as soon as it's green lighted, which I'm starting to think is going to happen within the next 2 to 3 years in terms of substantial regulations for the market to really be able to operate for its full intended use case. That's not just a one-off stablecoin bill. That's definitions on most of the assets. That's definitions on DeFi and all of that. I think these institutions are ready to step in a massive way. They're going to adopt it fast. And I think the best example of that I've ever seen, and I think this is a good transition into the ETF discussion, were those ETFs, because those ETFs came in right after Terra Luna blew up, right after Celsius blew up, right after all these different things blew up. And it looked like most institutions wouldn't have touched this industry with a 10-foot pole for years. But they were so ready to jump in. They were so ready to start building out their products in the space. And I think it just goes to show that whether or not they're directly telling you it or not, they are definitely ready to step in.
And we just saw the introduction of an XRP futures ETF in a large way. And we all know the signal here that you got to have the futures ETF before you can get the spot ETF. Well, we just got the futures ETF. I mean, Mikkel, what are your thoughts? Like, I mean, I see the court case, and we're getting ready to find out if there's going to be an appeal there or not. We're very close to also seeing the launch of the stablecoin. We see the rollout of this futures ETF. It feels like on one side of the equation, this is over and we're rolling, right? Then on the other side of the equation, I think, well, if they appeal, all of this stuff is still happening. So that kind of plays into the idea that there's that legal dog leash, but adoption is still growing and happening. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the things, and I've been saying this for a bit now, is the thing about an ETF, it's a very commoditized product. Like when you look at all the Bitcoin ETFs, right? Like if you're just your average person, you don't know that much about crypto, and you're throwing those 8 Bitcoin ETFs, I mean, you're picking randomly. Like other than the expense ratio on it, like most people are not thinking about which Bitcoin ETF they're choosing. They might just choose BlackRock because it's the biggest one, but obviously the other ones have AUM. So for the most part, people are just picking based on what they feel like picking. I talk to people all the time who don't really understand crypto, who want to get into crypto, and I tell them about XRP and they want to go buy XRP. The first thing they tell me is, oh, I typed in XRP into my brokerage and nothing came up. If those people, right, if those people were searching XRP into their brokerage and the XRP ETF, they're just going to pick the one that looks most like XRP to them. So if it's like XRPX or something like that, they might pick that one because that's the one that they think they're buying XRP. It's a long-winded way of saying is for these ETF issuers, it's a race to get the first ETF out there, because if you're not the first one out there with a good ticker, people are just not going to know about your ETF. There's really not much you can do to differentiate your ETF over the rest of these ETFs. So I think it's going to force the hand of a lot of the larger issuers, because as the smaller players who want to get an advantage on the larger issuers start to move down the totem pole and start doing a lot of ETFs for the smaller cryptocurrencies, the BlackRocks and the Fidelities are going to say, well, we can't lose this race. We need to make sure that we stay competitive and that we're at the top of the AUM when people start rushing in. So I think it's going to be a snowball effect. The institutions that are more willing to take risk, the smaller institutions are going to say, all right, let's go down the totem pole and start getting some of these smaller ETFs out there so that we can beat the BlackRocks, we can beat the Fidelities, but then they're going to respond by saying, hey, we're not going to let these little guys eat our lunch. And I think that's going to snowball into a lot of these ETFs coming in the near future.
Absolutely. I love it. It's an exciting time, even though we all have been through so much. And I can feel that all of us are like, just like, can we, I just want, how much further, I need some water, It's like, I know a lot of people are out of gas, I know that, and I know what it feels like. And I actually said this in my video I did earlier this morning, I can be funny, I can have a good outlook, I can be positive about where we are in this space. And the reason I can do that is because I've spent so many years and countless hours just diving down into this company and this technology. And I feel so good about where it's going. So for me, I'm like, listen, I'm not a doctor. I've not even played one on TV, but I do believe in Ripple and XRP. Your final thought, Mikkel.
I don't think I could have said it any better myself in regards to that. I mean, it's one thing to have like unadvised or I guess blind confidence in something, but it's so nice when like it's almost like the entire ecosystem and how powerful this technology is. It kind of makes our job easy of looking at it because it's like every single day I just become more and more bullish on this asset class. I become more and more certain in what XRP is going to achieve in the world. I become more certain in Ripple's use case for it and how they're running their business. And it's just one of those things. It's like it makes it so easy to say, regardless of what the prices of these assets have done, it's so obvious to me in my own personal thesis that these things are going to be absolutely critical in really reinventing the financial system. And just as you said, when it comes to slow days, boring days, or whatever, those are the things that are so nice to fall back on. Like, it's so nice to understand that there really is such a strong foundation here. Ripple and XRP have 10 years of history through blow up after blow up, continue to innovate, continue to meet with the regulators. And like you said, it's just such a nice thing to fall back on, where when times are boring and they're not eventful, you can just say, this technology has never looked better, and my confidence in it is still at an all-time high.
No doubt about it. And I'm excited to get this legislation because, one, people don't really realize stablecoin legislation in some way or another doesn't just mean pegged to dollars. Stablecoins are commodities being stablecoins. Gold is a stablecoin. Oil's a stablecoin. Dollars are stablecoins. This is big deal. And I'm really excited to see that legislation come out to find out where USD Tether sits and if it mirrors the MiCA approach in the EU. And if it does, which I expect it to do, as we discussed, I think it pushes it down out of the two largest economies of the world, so Tether can never, ever challenge the US dollar ever again in life. And that'll be the first major step of really getting that into place it needs to be. Like you said, I think it continues to serve the smaller markets of the world for a very long time. But Mikkel, what a great conversation, man. Thank you so much for being here. Always look forward to it, my friend.
Oh, thank you for having me on. This is always a blast and can't wait for the next one.
You know it, man. Don't go anywhere. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. Have a great weekend. We'll catch all of you on the next one.